Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and once again, before I get started with this video, I feel like I have to put this disclaimer at the beginning of basically every single one of my videos. If you hear talking in my background, I'm still at my mom's place in self-isolation mostly, although self-isolation is, at least in Austria, kind of getting looser and you can go out a bit more and smaller shops have opened already again. But anyway, if you can hear talking in the background, it's her, she's on a video conference and she sounds quite upset currently, so she's talking quite loudly, louder than usual in any case, so there might be a bigger chance that you can hear her. But moving on, today's video is going to be my mid-month wrap-up for April. April, of course, also means owls, so some of the books that I have read so far this month are for the owls. However, in this video I will not go into which prompts I read them for. I just want to talk about my thoughts on the books that I read, if that kind of makes sense. And then I will later on in my end of the month wrap-up just wrap up all of the owls again and talk about which books I read for which subjects and which prompts and so on. And the first book I read this month was To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. This is a Little Mermaid retelling, with the mermaids in this book being kind of a mixture between sirens and mermaids, so they kind of were quite brutal in parts, but like not as dark as the siren myth can get. And we follow two characters in this book. One of them is a prince who has made it his life's mission to kill sirens or mermaids, and the other one is of course our Little Mermaid character who has been cursed with legs, and to get her fins back she has to take the heart of said prince. And I really enjoyed this book. It wasn't the best book I ever read, by no means, but it's just your usual typical fun YA high fantasy romp. It's a standalone, which is really nice. It's just really nice to sometimes just finish a book and end it and not have to continue on with a series. It's also very romance focused, but at the same time it does have its more actiony bits. And yeah, I just overall really enjoyed it. My enjoyment of this book was definitely 4 stars, so to the point where I did really enjoy myself, but I know it's not gonna be an all-time favorite or anything. However, I did end up giving it 3.5 stars because the story was quite simple and quite basic, and while I did enjoy the banter between our main character, the siren main character, and the prince, it also isn't something that's like out of the typical for these types of YA stories. You quite often have your prince character and then your main female character and they have some type of banter. So it just was your typical fun story, and it's one I can highly recommend if you're just, especially in a reading slump maybe, and just looking for something that's easy to get into, that's easy to read, that's not hard to understand, and that's not heavy at all or anything, but that's just something that's fun for the moment. And I also did read it in one day and basically in a single sitting. And the only thing I can say that I definitely didn't enjoy in this book is that it had this thing, which I have found actually quite a few books have had that were published in the past few years, where you have 2 perspectives and both were written in first person narration type of style. And I just don't enjoy it because there are very few authors who can do this well, where both of the characters have their very distinct voices. And yeah, this one wasn't a mess. It wasn't where I was constantly confused who's talking, but it also wasn't like incredibly well done. So yeah, can recommend it. I did read this for the owls as well, by the way, and I gave it 3.5 stars. And moving on to the second book I finished, which was 5 Great Short Stories by Jack London, which of course is a short story collection by him. And Jack London is one of my favorite classics writer. I have read 3 books of his so far. I think that's the most I have read by any single writer that's like classic literature, and I really love his like atmospheric descriptions. He is a writer who very much describes the surroundings of what's happening, and I really enjoy this. I find that he does it in a way where it's not boring, but where you can really kind of see everything and see the landscape kind of what's happening. And so he's a very descriptive writer, but I still only gave this 2.5 stars because I did find the stories in the short story collection to be kind of repetitive and kind of boring and like nothing really new. It was the same that I knew from his other books, from the Sea Wolf, from the two wolf books, so White Fang and Call of the Wild, or dog books that I read of his. So it just wasn't anything new, and while I did enjoy the descriptions, they did get kind of boring after some time because, again, I think if I hadn't read all the stories at once, if I maybe had read one and then a few years later read the next one and so on, I wouldn't have been as boring and they wouldn't have been as same to each other, but the way it was, they were quite similar. And of course, Jack London is a very brutal writer, and so the content of the short stories was very dark a lot of times as well, and I'm just like not in the mood for dark stuff at the moment, so I think that was also a reason why I didn't enjoy it. So writing was beautiful as always, I love Jack London's writing, but the stories themselves I did not enjoy quite as much. And I also read this 40 Owls. The next book I also finished 40 Owls, and that was The Lost Plot by Genevieve Cogman, which is book 4 in the Invisible Library series, and I'm kind of flying through the series right now. I read book 3 I think in February or in March, I'm not sure. I think I read it in February. And I'm also gonna continue on with book 5 later this month, and this is a series where we're set in a world that has multiple different universes of Earth, and all of the universes have alternate history storylines. And so you have some worlds that are set in the future, other worlds that are set in the past, and so on. Some worlds where China is the big empire and not the British Empire that was like the huge imperial power at some point in history. And we follow our main character Irene Winters, who is a librarian, and the library is kind of this entity in between all the other different universes. And as a librarian, she basically has to steal books from different universes, different rare and unique books, to kind of keep the balance between all the different universes. It's kind of too complicated to explain how that keeps the balance. But anyway, since book 3, we're kind of getting led a bit more into the overarching politics between all the different worlds, because there's also dragons and there's fae, and dragons and fae know of the existence of the different universes and can travel between them, and humans of course only live in their small world but don't know anything about the others. And yeah, I really enjoyed this 4th book. I think it was the one I enjoyed most so far, or I might have enjoyed book 3 more. But anyway, I gave it 4 stars. It's a really fun series that I can highly recommend. It's like not the greatest series of all time, but again, it's just one of those series that's easy to get into, that's easy to understand, that has engaging characters and fun characters, and that has just a really unique and fun concept. As a series, it's kind of set between the genres of urban fantasy, historical fantasy, as well as a little bit of high fantasy sprinkled into it. And yeah, I just can recommend it because it's just fun. And it's an adult series, but it's set on the easier side of adult fantasy, so as most urban fantasy or historical fantasy is. Next, I read The Citral by Shakil Kanish, which is a book that I got an e-copy of in return for a review. And this is a debut dark urban fantasy novel that's kind of set between YA and new adult. I wouldn't quite put it into the new adult section, but maybe that's just because a lot of times I find that new adult either gets like very brutal and very gritty, or it gets very sexual. And this book, while it is dark, it's not like quite the Nevernight style dark, I would say. But I also wouldn't put it in the YA category because it does read a little bit older than YA. So I would put it somewhere between those two. if you're someone who looks for more new adult that isn't overly sexualized or so, I would definitely recommend this book. And this is, as I said, a dark urban fantasy, and we follow Lake, whose brother is killed at the very beginning of this book. And through the death of his brother, he kind of finds out about this magic school, and he's the first human to be let into the school and to start learning magic. Another thing I gotta add about this book is that Lake is a gay teen of color, and it's also own voices, which we definitely don't see a lot of. I kind of always see on Twitter the discourse that there's not enough female stories. However, especially in fantasy, I find, especially in YA fantasy, but maybe that's because YA is mostly written by female authors, I find that there's not exactly a lack of female romances. Of course there is a lack of that, but like just within the LGBT spectrum, not counting the overwhelming amount of straight romances, but like simply looking at the LGBT romances, I personally find that especially in fantasy there's a lack of male romances compared to female romances. And if there's a male romance, a lot of times it's not written by an own voices author, so I definitely recommend this book just for simply that reason. Aside from that, my thoughts on the book were that I overall gave it between 3 and 3.5 stars. I really did enjoy it, and I really do want to read the second book to this novel. I think it's a duology. And that aside from some pacing issues I had, the story did kind of take a bit to take off. I really enjoyed the characters. Even though I wasn't too fond of Lake at the beginning of the novel, I thought he was a kind of very passive character, and it seemed like stuff just happened to him and he didn't really take actions. At the same time, he did take actions on paper, but to me it didn't feel like he took actions, but he still had grown on me a lot by the end of the novel. I also really enjoyed the magic system, which was kind of a mix of a magic system that was very familiar with and that was based in types of magic that I'm familiar with, but putting its own little twist on it and its own little difference on it. And the thing that I absolutely was surprised by the most is that I absolutely could not see the ending coming. I couldn't see the twist coming. I absolutely was really surprised by everything that happened in like the last 50 pages or so of the book, which just with fantasy and urban fantasy doesn't happen to me a lot anymore. And so yeah, I'm definitely going to keep my lookout for the second book and hopefully finish this duology next year or the year after. I don't know when it's gonna come out. And then the last book I finished so far this month is I finally finished The Shadow Rising by Robert Jordan, which is book 4 in the Wheel of Time series. And this is actually the first Wheel of Time book that I really did enjoy. I finally felt like I felt comfortable in the world and in the series, which like 4 books in might have taken a long time, but then again it's a 15-book series, so like comparatively maybe it's not that long. But also maybe the reason why it took me so long is that between book 1, book 2 and book 3 I always had 1 year. So I read book 1, then 1 year passed, I read book 2, 1 year passed, I read book 3, and this time only like 3 months passed before I picked up book 4. However, I'm finally excited to continue with the series, and I hope I enjoy book 5 as much as I did book 4. And those were the books that I finished so far this month, but now let's just quickly go into the books that I have started, that I'm currently reading. Firstly, I have Dr. Faustus by Thomas Mann. This is the book that I pulled from my TBR chart for this month, and I am only 50 pages in so far, so not very far. I probably won't finish this month. Then I am almost finished with The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. I have about 70 pages left, so a fourth of the book, and I'm really enjoying this so far. I started Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Ames, and I'm about 80-90 pages in, so like it doesn't look quite a lot. I'm like a fifth of the way in and I'm really enjoying this so far as well. I really like the writing style. It's really something different. And the last book I'm also currently reading is Coraline and Other Stories by Neil Gaiman. I am about halfway through Coraline, or a third of the way through Coraline, which is the first of the story and the longest of the stories. And yeah, I'm hoping to finish this soon. And with that said, that is it for my video. That is it for all the books I read so far in April and all the books that I'm currently reading. Tell me in the comments down below how your owls are going. I have 3.5 books left to finish, and I do hope that I can succeed in this year's owls. And yeah, all the links to my social media are in the description box down below, so go and check those out. And stay happy, stay healthy, stay safe, and I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!